Okay, so picture this. You're standing right in the middle of the red dirt of the Australian outback. You've got your dirt-stained boots on, the sun is just beating down on your neck, and you are a massive-scale wheat farmer gearing up for the 2026-27 winter crop. We're talking thousands of acres of land, literally millions of dollars worth of heavy machinery, and your entire livelihood completely depending on the seeds you're about to put into the ground. But right now, there is a massive storm brewing that threatens to just upend your entire operation. And strangely enough, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with the weather. So why on earth is a crisis happening literally 12,000 kilometers away, completely draining your wallet? Look, if you're farming in Australia, you kind of feel geographically isolated, right? You're tucked safely away at the bottom of the globe, operating in a wealthy, highly diversified nation that actually exports energy to the rest of the world. By all traditional logic, you should be completely insulated from geopolitical turbulence on the exact opposite side of the planet. So how is a conflict in the Middle East directly threatening your farm, your family, and your financial survival? Well, in this explainer, we're going to map out exactly how this 12,000-kilometer shockwave travels all the way from the Persian Gulf straight to the Australian outback. All right, let's dive into Section 1, the view from the paddock. The brutal reality is pretty much staring you down right now, and that number is $3.13. That is the record price in Australian dollars per liter for diesel hitting you at this exact moment. You're running these massive, highly mechanized air seeders. I mean, these things are literally the size of a small house, and they're running around the clock to hit your absolutely crucial April to June planting window. So at over $3 a liter, simply turning the ignition burns a massive hole straight through your budget before a single seed even hits the soil. And then comes the second half of this nightmare, a 40% surge in fertilizer costs. Because you're relying on high-quality nutrients to maintain those massive export yields that actually keep you competitive in the global market, these compounded input costs are severely and very rapidly compressing your profit margins. Honestly, even if you are the most ruthlessly efficient, data-driven operator out there in the Eastern wheat belt, a surge like this is just agonizing to manage. Which brings us to Section 2, the 12,000-kilometer supply chain. Official UNCTA data actually completely shatters the illusion of agricultural self-reliance. While you might feel, totally removed from global conflicts, nearly a third, 32% to be exact, of your total fertilizer imports comes straight from the Persian Gulf. The literal lifeblood of your soil, the nitrogen and phosphorus you desperately need to grow your wheat, is being pumped out of one of the most geopolitically turbulent regions on the planet. So when things get difficult over there, you end up paying for it directly in your fields. But the vulnerability doesn't actually stop at fertilizer. As S&P Global notes, you are, quote, highly exposed to regional refiners like South Korea for finished products. Now, Australia is famous for being a net energy exporter, right? Shipping out massive amounts of coal and natural gas. But here's the catch. It doesn't really refine much of its own oil anymore. This means you rely entirely on importing the finished, usable diesel you desperately need to keep those tractors moving. So here's how this fragile global assembly line actually plays out. Step 1, raw crude oil is extracted from the ground in the Persian Gulf. Step 2, instead of sailing straight down to you, that crude oil diverts to massive Asian refining hubs, heavily concentrated in places like South Korea, where it's finally processed into usable diesel. Step 3, only then is that finished diesel loaded onto another tanker, shipped all the way down to Australia, trucked way out into the outback, and pumped straight into your tractor. Your isolated, independent operation, it's really just the final, incredibly vulnerable stop on a massively exposed global chain. That brings us right to Section 3, the pre-planting price shock. Imagine you're sitting at your kitchen table, just trying to do the math for the upcoming season, and you are staring at two terrible choices. Option A, you grit your teeth, you lock in fertilizer contracts right now at these wildly expensive 40% hiked prices. You secure the nutrients for your crop, sure, but you absolutely destroy your profit margins in the process, taking a massive financial risk right up front. Or there's option B. You reduce your fertilizer application rates this year to save some cash today, but you risk a devastatingly low crop yield when harvest time rolls around. You're essentially trapped between financial ruin right now or agricultural failure later. I mean, what would you do? Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, ripples across the Asia-Pacific. You have to remember your farm isn't just growing food for Australia, it is literally a foundational breadbasket for the entire Asia-Pacific region. We're talking massive, massive exports of wheat, beef, dairy, sugar, and barley. millions and millions of people in neighboring countries rely heavily on your high-quality exports. So if you are forced to pick option B, cutting back on fertilizer and producing less wheat, this entire regional food supply is directly threatened. And the timeline of this whole impending crisis is ticking. The aggregate yield impact will become starkly visible at harvest. The really tough choices you're being forced to make right now during this planting window, they won't stay a secret for long. By the time November and December roll around and those combine harvesters finally hit the fields, the aggregate consequences of reduced fertilizer use are going to manifest as a very real, very tangible global supply shock. Less wheat harvested on your land directly and inevitably translates to less wheat available on the global market. To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. If distance doesn't equal safety, who really pays the price at the grocery store? This entire scenario absolutely shatters the myth of geographic insulation. A crisis in the Persian Gulf travels 12,000 kilometers just to hike up your costs in Western Australia. But that shockwave, it doesn't stop in the outback. When your yields drop and global wheat supplies tighten up, that cost eventually travels straight to the local supermarket shelf, no matter what country the consumer actually lives in. It just goes to show the global food system is entirely interconnected. Keep learning, and I will catch you in the next one.